Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustavson and Barry Smith.
Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Barry Smith. Hey, Barry, how you doing, brother?
Doing great, my friend. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. Here it is. We're recording this. This year has just flown by. We only have a little bit of time left for this year, 2022. So I want us to finish strong, my friend.
Yeah.
Let's make 2022 just an incredible year because it's not over yet. We still got a little bit of time left on the clock, but let's make something special. And you and I, man, we keep challenging each other, and I love it. But let's challenge all our listeners and viewers as well, huh?
Yeah, I think definitely. Don't only look at finishing strong, but be intentional about using the rest of the year for a way to set you up for success for 23.
Yeah.
As much as we're coming out of the pandemic, now we got new challenges, I think, coming up. So it's going to be stay positive and really, what are you going to do intentionally as we move into and through 2023 to set yourself up for success? So I'm excited about it. 23 is going to be an epic year.
It can be a definitely, and the reason why it can be epic is because we've done the preparation.
Yeah.
You and I were sharing some quotes earlier, and John Maxwell, just recently at an event that you and I attended, he made a quote that I wrote down. I thought it was pretty good. Every day we're either repairing or preparing.
Yeah.
That was powerful, right?
One of the two.
And I've been thinking through that. And I'm like, wait a minute. Am I trying to repair 2022 or am I trying to prepare for 2023?
Yeah.
So that's the question. So here's what I want to dive into. We're going to be unpacking the powers of our imagination, how we can shape the future, how we invent the future. We just talked about 2023. We know that we can land the plane here in 2022, make this a strong and powerful year too. I want to talk about the power of patterns. So you ready to dive in on this one? Because this one is a game changer, I think.
Let's get after it.
See from this mindset, boy, it'll change everything.
I'm with you. Great topic.
When you think of patterns, let's start with that. What are patterns and why do they matter?
I think for me, it's habits. And this last year, especially early in the year, I read Atomic Habits, and probably towards the end of 21 when I actually started reading that. But a great book, and really showed me how, a couple things. One, how your habits, your patterns in life can work for you or work against you. And so I've been really focused on one, identifying it, because I think you need a new level of awareness to really see where you're succeeding and where you're falling short. But it's the patterns in life. Your patterns do become your habits, and your habits kind of, play into pretty significantly what your results are. So those patterns are going to make a big difference, so I challenge myself and you, Mr. Gustavson. What are the patterns in your life that are working, and what are the ones that are not?
Yeah, it's so true, right? If we could just sit down and just say, okay, what are the patterns that I'm living my life to? And they are representative behaviors, right? And habits and things of that sort. But if we look at those patterns, it can tell a lot about ourselves, and we can tell a lot about others around us. And I think the most successful way to lead, right? John Maxwell and others talk about lead from a position of representation. Be the picture.
Yeah.
Right? You can communicate and verbalize and write books and, share all sorts of great stuff. But people are not watching what you say, they're watching what you do.
Yeah.
So how do we lead that way? This talks about. So one of the first, I love this concept of patterns. Remember Dr. Henry Cloud?
Oh, yeah. You get what you create and you get what you allow.
Yeah. And you and I had him on a platform builders call back in the day. We used to have something that predates this that was pretty exciting. And we still kind of tie some of the things that we do related to that because we all have a platform, guys. Every one of us has a platform. It's just, what are we doing with it? How effective are we? What are we communicating? How are we adding that value? So that's our common denominator, is that we all do something different, but we all want to add value. How do we do that? So with Henry Cloud, we had a book that we went through with him, actually amongst ourselves, and then we had him on the call, and it was Boundaries for Leaders.
Boundaries, yeah. Great book.
And what was really special about that was, and maybe this is what most effective authors do when they write. Maxwell does this, others write it. They look to see, they observe what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. They take a moment to really recognize what's happening. How are things being done? What influences what are the things that are people doing to influence others?
Yeah.
And maybe we can do something with that too. So I think that's why this is important. So talk to me. You said you read James Clear book, and James Clear, love to have you on our podcast. Come join us sometime. Barry and I would love to chat with you. You would be a great addition just for a discussion, because this idea of habits, so powerful. What are some of the takeaways that you learned from that great resource?
Well, I think it's, for me, again, it was a higher level of awareness to really look at the habits, the patterns in my life, because at the end of the day, they're pretty much unconscious, right?
Yeah.
They're the patterns in our lives, or the habits in our lives. We do them without thinking. So if we're doing something that's not really helping us move forward, then that's what we're doing. A bad habit of watching too much TV, or just not focusing enough when you're working on a project, not the right priorities. All these things can really go back to patterns in our lives, which, by the way, don't have to predict our future, but they typically do. I think it was Peter Drucker said the best way to predict the future is to create it. One of my favorite quotes. And so, take that with Atomic Habits, with, other things that you and I have talked about and studied. And it really becomes a question of, what patterns are you going to create in your life? Because the patterns we have in our life now are exactly what got us right where we're at. So now, what are we going to do to change that? I think we all want more. So how do we do it? And it starts with action, and action is going to come out of your patterns and habits, what you learn from that, and where you can go moving forward.
So, and when you talk about habits, right, there are those triggers, those prompts, those cues that take place, and then the behavior that how we respond to those things, and then the results that take place afterwards. So that there's a pattern to habits in themselves when you think about it. True?
Yeah.
And I started thinking years ago, quick story. I was in Toulouse, France. You ever been in France?
Yes, not Toulouse.
Toulouse, interesting town, beautiful town. It's where the Airbus is, that's where their main factory is and all that. And so we were down there, and just kind of, I was, be honest with you, I was like a fish out of the water, right? I mean, I did not speak French, not a lick, right? Other than bonjour, merci, right? Just the common words. I didn't know much. And I found myself in kind of a predicament, because people in France, and I love you guys in France, but you want us to speak French when we're in France. And I don't speak French. I just don't know it, to be honest with you. And I had a little cheat code and all that. And I realized, wow, I got to struggle here. And so how am I going to learn? How am I going to get around? How am I going to really feel connected to this city? It's beautiful. It's a beautiful town. And I was hungry one day. I was super hungry. And I was like, well, I don't know enough of the restaurants right now. And I was kind of the lead in, right? There's others coming, and I was there early. And I saw a grocery store. I'm like, oh, well, a grocery store. I know what that is. So I went into the grocery store, and I'm like, okay, I'll just find some food. I mean, it can't be that hard. It's a grocery store. And of course, everything's in French, and everything was covered, right? So you couldn't really see what the real food was. It was so wrapped up well, white paper wrap and all that. But I tried my best, and I found something that looked like ham. It said jambon, so it wasn't ham. It didn't say ham, but I was like, well, I think that's ham. Maybe I could make a ham sandwich, right? So I just started following patterns. I started looking around other customers in the grocery store, and I was like, okay. And I knew my own patterns in terms of how I shop back home. And I realized, well, there's some common ground here. Look for that. And then when it came time to buying the food, right? I had some corn chips, I had a sandwich, a bread to make a sandwich, some tomatoes, everything that I needed. But now I needed to purchase this thing. And I'd been watching folks on the line to see how they did it. And again, I'm looking for patterns
Yeah.
because that's how we learn. We learn by watching other people's patterns. Even at an early age, when we were young, we learned to walk and maybe do all the other things that we did because we're seeing and watching other people do those things. Patterns were set before us. And so in that context right there, I realized it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me in France. It was 2005. Like, wow, okay. Like I knew what the cashier was asking, even though I did not understand a word of what they're saying. They're saying plastic or paper, right? Plastique or whatever the word for paper is in French. They're asking for a reward card, which I didn't have. So I could say no to that, and just follow the whole pattern and get out of there without them even knowing I was a strange foreigner in an amazing land. But it was a powerful moment for me, recognizing that there's patterns all around us, and it's how we adapt and configure and settle into whatever environment we're in. And also not just settle in as if it's comfort zone, but also establish new ground and be able to push forward and advance forward. And especially in light of everything you mentioned at the front end of our podcast, like we don't know what's coming, but we can prepare for it. How do we do that? So that's why I love this idea of patterns, understanding the power of it, and looking back to see how we've progressed to date. There's a lot we can learn by looking at our patterns. So, anyway, thoughts on that?
No, I go back to where we're at in the world economy right now, looking at a recession and just the markets up and down. And, what are all these experts doing right now? They're looking at the historical patterns of what's taken place, on a global and national level, economic level, and trying to, again, predict based on the patterns that have taken place in the past. So I love your story. It's true. I mean, cultures have patterns. You and I are both, fairly well traveled. We've been all over the world, and you go to different places, and it's a different way of doing things. And if we haven't been exposed to that pattern, like you say, it's foreign, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the accurate word. It's foreign to us.
Yeah.
And so when we're trying to bring that into what really matters, to you and I and the listeners here, if a pattern or a habit is needed to be successful and you don't know what that is, you're not familiar with it, then you're going to have a challenge, right? So then
Yeah.
how important is that pattern? It's doing things that are going to move the needle forward. And that to me, starts with awareness. And then of course, my favorite word, environment, is going to play into it as well. This last year, again, a lot of intentionality on my part this last year to really figure out how can I be more productive? How can I get a better ROI on any time I'm investing? And even down to, keeping my desk clean, getting rid of sticky notes. I gave up sticky notes,
Yeah.
because it was just a way for me to put off simple tasks. And then they pile up, and then they're everywhere, and then you're not getting them done anyway because you stacked them all on top of each other when you kind of cleaned up.
Yeah.
And so little things like that was a pattern I had, right? That was a pattern. Just make a note on a sticky note. It might be a 20-second task, but I didn't want to do it at the time. I wanted to put it off, want to procrastinate. So I had developed a serious problem, a pattern with sticky notes, and I broke that pattern.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what can I do? What can I do to become more efficient? So I'm using, I use Trello. I use some different resources now that I can take with me, that I can take action on, and it's made a big difference. So that one little thing, when we're talking about a big picture, but one little thing like dumping the sticky notes can make a big difference. Patterns matter.
So good. Yeah. The question really that begs for us to ask and contemplate and reflect on is what are the patterns that are helping me, and what are the patterns that are hurting me, hindering me?
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, we're human, guys. None of us are perfect. We have habits that help us, and we have habits that hinder us. And Barry just shared a couple habits that were hindering him, patterns that were as he looked at those patterns, like, well, wait a minute, that's a pattern of mine that's not good. Our environments, I'm trying to, in a transition spot, trying to move stuff around, and I've made that an excuse for the environment I'm in because I'm
Yeah.
moving stuff around, right? Well, wait a minute, that's a pattern. If it repeats itself, it's a pattern that repeats itself, that means it's a habit. That's what
Yeah.
a habit is a repeating pattern. But let's pull this thread a little bit further, right? So let's talk about the power of patterns that we can learn from other people. Certainly, as we look at ourselves, we may feel a little bit defeated because we know we have some patterns that need to change out. But we can also feel empowered from patterns, whether they're our own patterns or maybe the patterns from other people. So think about this, Barry, and I want you to talk into it. John Maxwell, what was the one thing that he did early on that changed the vector for him forever? And this is true for others too. It's not just John Maxwell.
Yeah. It's a commitment to personal growth.
Commitment to personal growth. And so what he did was he went and spent $100. Said, "Hey, would you like to have? Can I buy you dinner? Can I pay you $100? I just want to. I just have a few questions.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you a few things." Well, what was he asking? He was asking for patterns. He wanted to know, hey, what did you do to do this? How did you build this congregation? How did you connect with these type of folks? How did you deal with different generation gaps within within the audience that you had and with the congregation that you were? Lots of questions that were all those questions were reflective of trying to understand patterns. It goes back to Aristotle's quote. He's got a great quote, Barry. Aristotle said that the greatest virtues are those which are most useful to other persons.
Yeah.
So if we can, I'm learning from you, I'm learning from others. Like, that's my mission now. I'm looking for patterns. I'm like back in Toulouse trying to see things, understand things, and be able to learn things because that's how I rewire my brain. But we'll talk about brain rewiring here in a minute. But thoughts on that, like reaching out, finding other people.
Yeah. The Aristotle quote made me think of Zig Ziglar's quote, right? Help enough people get what they want, they'll help you get what you want. And you think about patterns and how we help others. I spent the better part of the last decade helping guys like John Maxwell, Paul Martinelli, Christian Simpson, build their brand, build their platform, help create content. And that's always been a dream of my own. So now I'm in a place where I'm starting that, right? I'm going to be launching some stuff here soon. So what did I do? I looked at guys like John Maxwell and Paul Martinelli and Christian Simpson and said, okay, what are the patterns I've been watching for 10 years? There's my answer.
Yes.
I just basically need to repeat that, and there's honestly just a minor learning curve in there rather than starting fresh. It's a way to kind of leverage the proximity I've been blessed to have with those guys and others, and how to use that now to to fulfill my dream. So it's an exciting time, but I can't even imagine what it would be like to just starting just blank, no clue, no idea. I think that's why you see a lot of the big thought leaders today trying to help people put together online content. Everybody's got some ideas out there, but they just don't have any clue on how to do it. And it's shifting. And online education is shifting. I feel bad for our traditional educational system right now because it's going the wrong way for them. They're going to have to get creative or they're going to turn into Kodak.
That's right. Kodak. Think about that. Kodak, Blockbuster, Borders. We can name a bunch of different places, right? They were top of Radio Shack.
Yeah.
Radio. Think about where Radio Shack is. They were right next to Apple Computer. Right next to them.
Yeah.
There was the trinity of computers that came out in 1978. Right? There was the Mac, or actually it was the Apple II. Right? So Apple had their Apple II computer.
The TRS-80?
TRS-80 coming out of Radio Shack. They were there. Where are they now? Right? So we've got to continue to learn. They found the pattern early on, but
yeah,
They didn't realize they got to reinvent them. You got to reinvent yourself.
Well, and that's it. I think that in all of this, Paul, I think that's the key right there. Patterns will only take you so far, just like I mentioned earlier on, got you to where you're at,
Yep.
but it's not going to get you to where you want to go. And so we got to increase a pattern. We got to change a pattern. I love how you say reinvent. You're the imagine guy, right? And so it's time to you got to stay with the times. I say this in mentoring and coaching folks all the time. What's relevant, and this is in respect to sales and being a person of influence, what's relevant to somebody today is what's relevant to them today. And if you're not speaking into that, then don't anticipate much engagement.
Yeah. There's a reason why we follow trends, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, yeah, okay. Some of these trends don't last long, but follow them, see where folks are going, see what's happening. And that helps you be relevant. Why do we need to change our patterns a little bit, tweak them, change them, modify them to be relevant?
Yeah.
Maxwell's not the same John Maxwell as he was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The truth of it is, if you're watching this and listening to this, you're not the same person you were 10 years ago, or are you? Or are you? Right? If you're watching this podcast, I know you're different because we're challenging you to break average, right?
Right.
So,
no,
what's really...
You get a perfect example of John. Look, his greatest selling book of all time, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. What did he just do in the last year? New edition, updated, new and approved.
That's right, because Lance Armstrong's story just wasn't going to cut it anymore.
Or go way back in the day with the law of E.F. Hutton.
That's right.
Things change. Nothing is just forever in the culture and the world we live in.
Well, it's a great point on 21 Laws. That's a patterns book.
Yeah.
It's the laws are all patterns of leadership. And there's adjustments and fine tuning that you have to do with every one. Those laws are gold. They don't necessarily change themselves, but the way you execute them.
Yeah.
The things that you do, your strategy and tactics to be able to execute on that law has to change because you got to be relevant. So,
well, and I think you have to be flexible, and I think you got to meet people where they are, but you also have to meet yourself where you're at. Where are you going to be the most productive? I look at you and I. We both love reading, but what's the difference between us? I won't touch a Kindle. I won't do an Audible. I want that physical book. I want to mark it up. I want to highlight it. You're the opposite. You want that Kindle. You want that Audible. We're going through the same content, different pattern, right? Different pattern as a way to navigate that, getting the same value out of it. But if I was, if I was put in a position to go through a Kindle or you going through a hard copy, it would just take away from those patterns and habits we have on taking on a task, and if we look at anything in our life like that, where are we going to be most productive? Where are we going to get the most value out of anything we're doing? So we've all heard the expression, you got to meet people where they're at, but I think we need to meet ourselves where we're at too, and really take a look at, what pattern is going to work best for us. You got different personalities are going to take things on differently.
Yeah. Have you ever watched the show Master Chef?
No.
It's interesting to watch, right? Gordon Ramsay, and he's got a couple other judges on there, and he brings in maybe 12 people to start the season, and they're all kind of home chefs, and they want to make it big. They want to be the next Master Chef. And they're all given different challenges. And if you ever watch the show, and I won't get into it too much, it's kind of fun to watch. I'm not a chef. I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen, but I like to observe patterns. And when you watch that show, you'll see some patterns taking place, and you'll see some of the best chefs are the ones who pick up the patterns the fastest. And they may have never done it before. There's people in there who've never baked a cake before, and yet they're on this show. Like, how in the world did they get there? But they're watching, they're learning, they're continuing to stretch themselves. And the winner of this past season, I'm giving a spoiler alert away, Dora, I think is her name, 20 years old. 8
Wow.
years earlier, she was in the junior master chef, and now she's with the adults and she wins the whole thing. And you can see the progress. You can see her journey. You can see how she's changed her mindset. And with patterns and application and understanding comes confidence.
Yeah, good word.
And when you have confidence, man, you can conquer the world. And confidence doesn't mean arrogance. It just means I know I have the ability to do something
Yeah.
and I'll figure it out. And you still hit roadblocks, but you find a way to go around the leaf.
Yeah.
Reference to Pixar's Bug's Life. But the ones that figure it out are following, like when Gordon Ramsay cooks the food or whatever, and they see it. I mean, there's plenty of examples. He's shown the pattern. He's provided evidence in terms of how it's done. Those who can take time to really observe it, learn it, understand it, they're the ones who do the best.
Well, and I love that, and I'd add the word in between that, of competence. I think that's where that confidence comes from, and learning those patterns, either watching and learning. Like I say, I think cooking's a perfect example. Now you're speaking Greek to me. You talk to my youngest son or my wife, and it's all going to make sense. And then they might be watching that show, but
Yeah.
for me, it's just it's not a pattern I'm interested. It's not a pattern that's going to do me any good. So, make a choice to focus on something that's going to help me grow and increase the ability for me to add value to others. Learning how to cook is not that. I got plenty of people around me that can do that.
Yeah. But you know what I'm watching for, Barry, just so that you know? And this is what's fascinating. I'm looking for leadership.
Yeah.
I'm seeing who's the influencer here.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Because they've got to influence themselves. They got to influence potentially those around them. They're competitors, but sometimes they're teaming up. They've got to influence the judges. And it's just really interesting to watch, whether you're a chef or not. It's just interesting to watch that, because what gets in the way of decision making most of the time?
Yeah.
Emotion.
Yep.
And if they can handle the emotion, the struggle, the challenge, it's pretty amazing. And so that's why I love this idea of patterns. And we'll get into this whole idea of neuroplasticity here in a second. But the idea of patterns, I actually unpacked this years ago, and I won't get it technical. I won't put my Geek Squad hat on or whatever. But there's a guy named Christopher Alexander, who is an architect. Now, I'm bringing this up. I'm trying to bring this closer to home to you, because you building what matters, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're about. And Christopher Alexander is an architect, and he started to notice that the best designs, the best builds, the best places to visit and environments that were created were established by patterns. And so he wrote a book called, several books, but one of them was called A Pattern Language. And he described it this way. He says, each pattern describes a problem which occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to that problem in such a way that you can use the solution 1,000,000 times over. So what he was doing was, why was this courtyard the way it was? Why was it designed this way? Well, what were the struggles and challenges they needed to do? All right, and so he would identify that and he'd say, okay, what was the solution that came out of that? Just like the challenge that I faced buying food in Toulouse, France, there was a problem. I tried to find the solution to be able to solve that problem, and then I could use it again and again and again and again. That's what Maxwell was looking for. Hey, I've got a challenge, a problem. I'm trying to deal with different generations, different personalities, different expectations. How did you deal with it? What was your way? What was your pattern to be able to support that problem, have a solution that allowed you to get through that? And so he would leverage that, and he learned from that, and we're the benefactors of all those things that he learned with all the great books that he has. So it's pretty powerful.
No, definitely. I love you bringing an architect into it. It definitely hits closer home than the kitchen.
Yeah, I had to go. I had to get out of the kitchen and get out in the courtyard.
For me, I love that, because I think about going back 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 5,000 years, and just the architecture, the engineering that went into stuff, look at Roman architecture, the aqueducts, the pyramids, all the things, Chichen Itza, Machu Picchu, all these incredible
Yes.
things that were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago, following patterns, mathematical patterns. And so there's patterns that, live forever. But like you say, there's also ones that are changing all the time. So I
Yeah.
think it's important to build our foundation on patterns that work, health, taking care of yourself, things like that, that should change with time, but need to be there. You've gone through some health challenges, and I know you're, very committed now to having good, strong patterns in your life to make sure that, you stay healthy. I
Yeah.
appreciate that about you. I commend you for that.
Well,
But there
thank you.
again, those patterns make a difference. And like you say, leadership, go back to what I said earlier about following the people that have been successful.
Yeah.
Those are the patterns I'm looking for.
It's so true, right? I'm just to be honest and transparent with everybody. Other than genetics, most people are in a position or the predicament that they're in health-wise because of the patterns that they chose
Yeah,
early on.
absolutely.
And if you can change those patterns, if you could have changed them early on, maybe you wouldn't be in the predicament that you're in. Certainly that was my situation. But even still, it's never too late to start.
Yeah.
So change your patterns and change your living.
Yeah.
And you change your thinking and you change your future. So this is where the idea of neuroplasticity comes
Yeah.
together, right? Our brain actually it can rewire.
Yep.
It's elastic. It's able to change sometimes quickly, right? I've seen people who have lost dramatic amount of weight and they were stuck in patterns all their
Yep.
life. And then something happened where they changed their behavior, they changed their pattern. They set a new goal. They kept that goal, that why in front of them. And then compound interest. And
Yeah.
then before you know it, boom, transformation. I had a
Yeah.
guy come in at work, COVID happened. His name's, I won't mention his name. He comes in before COVID, he was a little bit overweight. I didn't think he was overweight. But then when he came in 4 or 6 months later, I forget how long, I saw him. I'm like, who is that? And I was like, oh, it's such and such. And I said to him, dude, you look great. He goes, yeah, I lost 60 pounds. I'm like, wow, you look fantastic. He goes, yeah, I changed my habits.
Yep.
This is who I am now. And I thought that was powerful. This is
Hey,
who I am now.
it can be very transformational, but we've got to make the initial take the initial step, to start that change, to change that pattern, because the patterns are there. Again, this is the patterns we've been following got us right where we're at, and
Yeah.
it's not going to change unless we change something. And that's the challenging part, but it starts with awareness.
Starts with an awareness.
Starts with
Here's
awareness.
something else too, right? We've heard this phrase, belief drives behavior.
Oh yeah.
And would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, me too. However, I think there's a time where sometimes behaviors drive beliefs, right? I've seen it. Just go back to the example we just
Yeah.
mentioned. Somebody who like, well, there's no way I'll ever lose 60 pounds. There's no way that will ever happen. And somebody challenged them, well, you don't know till you try. You don't know till you try. All right, well, I'll try it, but I doubt it. But they did it. They were consistent with it. They kept doing it. Boom. 4 months later, they show up at work and they're 60 pounds lighter, right? So what I realized, and I did some study on this, Barry, yes, beliefs drive behaviors. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes, I think that's 80% true of the time. But sometimes behaviors drive beliefs, right? And the point I made is think about something you once thought you couldn't do, but you tried to do anyhow. For me, my thought was this. For me, it was learning to jump off the diving board when I was a kid. Like, I can't do that. But my brother and all his friends were in the pool and they're like, come on, they're egging me on. And I'm like, I didn't think I could do it. And peer pressure, I did
Yeah.
it. Right. behavior changed belief.
Yeah.
So sometimes you got to just take that step of faith.
And I totally agree with that. And what I would attribute that to is that behavior was taking action.
Yes.
Again, Paul Martinelli taught me. I probably shared this, already on a previous podcast. You've got to take action to get a result.
Yeah.
And so I think that goes right in line, with your statement of sometimes behavior will drive belief, but it's taking that action to change that belief.
I love it. Well, dude, this has been awesome. I've really enjoyed it. Let's share our tip and challenge here. I just want to remind everybody we'd love to hear from you. We're so excited to be a part of this. And Barry, I'm so glad that you're in the co-host seat. We're doing this together because we've got some great conversations ahead. Part of me wants to just dive in and start getting into those conversations, but we're going to let this, we're following a pattern ourselves. And we want you guys to continue to come back, be a part of this thing. Watch what happens over the course of the next few weeks as we go through this discussion on the powers of belief, the powers of our imagination. We're talking about powers of patterns today. So go visit us at breakingaverage.com. So are you ready for a tip and challenge today?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think the tip is, put yourself in an environment to get more aware of what your habits are, your patterns. Again, they're kind of subconscious. We don't really think about them. A lot of them we've completely forgotten about. We just do them. Mm-hmm. That's a pattern in our life. So get yourself in a mastermind group. Get yourself, some people who can challenge your thinking. Get a coach. Put yourself in an environment that will allow you to start to identify some of those patterns that are holding you back. And then I think the challenge is then take action on that. Make the commitment to make a change to change those patterns. Your life is not going to change without changing a pattern that is currently in it.
Yeah.
It just won't. And look, path of least resistance, choose something simple. Choose something simple. Exercise a little more, walk one more day a week, swim one more day a week for an hour, for a half hour. Path of least resistance. Start somewhere. Start changing a pattern.
It's so powerful, guys. And you mentioned a great book, Atomic Habits. B.F. Fogg's got another book very similar, but complementary, so they don't compete.
Yeah.
Tiny Habits. Duhigg wrote a book, The Power of Habits.
Yeah, good
Those
stuff.
are three great resources. And whether you're a Kindle reader, I've got them both, right? If it's a great book, Barry, yes, I have it on Kindle, but if it's great, it's going to be on my shelf too. I got the real deal, right? Those are great resources. And I love how they talk about habit stacking.
Yes.
Which is kind of what you're alluding to here in this last tip and challenge, which is so powerful. What can you do? What's the one more thing that you can add to whatever habits you already have that will influence yourself and others around you, which is powerful. So I'm echoing that, but I'm going to add a little flavor to this that I think is powerful. We talked about Maxwell going and seeking people. I seek out folks like Barry. I'm going to ask you guys, seek somebody, find somebody that's been there, that's done it, that has experienced something, that's gone through a challenge and persevered and found the other side of it, and find out how they did it, right? Here's a great quote. Tony Robbins: success leaves clues. Go figure out what someone who was successful did and model it, improve it, but learn their steps. They have knowledge. What Tony Robbins is doing is asking us to curate patterns. And I just want to invite you guys to start thinking in that light too, right? Look at the patterns around you. They're everywhere. And some of those can change your life. If you capture those, reflect those, share those, build those, use those, you'll influence yourself and you'll influence those around you. That's how powerful this is. And in the process, remember, our brain's elastic, neuroplasticity. We start to shape our thinking, our mindset, and everything's different. As I already mentioned, We said Maxwell, we've mentioned him a few times as a model, but this could be representative of anybody, certainly representative of Barry and myself. We're not who we once were, and we're not who we intend to be. There's a definitely a place that we can step into. And how do we step into it? Patterns.
Yeah.
So, Barry, I love it.
I love that. You know, and we've all heard the expression "rewire your brain." Well, it's true. We can actually do that. You know, it is those electronic, transfers of energy on what we do. And when we tell our brain, enough, our brain realizes it, creates that new pattern. And that's what we've got to do, and we've got to do it forever, right? Or we're never going to change. So I love it, man. I'm sure we'll be revisiting this topic at some point in time.
For sure. And we would love to hear from you guys. If you're watching or listening and this power of patterns really resonates with you, or you have an additional thought, hey, we want to hear from you. Take a moment just to kind of reach out to us. Let us know how this episode is affecting you, allowing you to think. Guys, we want you to break average. If you don't change those patterns, if I don't change my patterns, I'm going to stay average. And we're a call for much more than that. A whole lot more. So Barry, again, I totally enjoyed this conversation. Yes, we do need to revisit, and maybe we'll find some experts on patterns to be able to bring in and have them share their perspective as well.
That'd be great. Would love to do that.
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. Join us next week. We've got a great conversation coming on the power of curiosity. See you guys.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. This show was produced by R Squared Multimedia. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.